Hello, everybody. We're going to have a lovely time today because I'm here with two wonderful Canadian women who are both advocates for men. We've just been having a chat about all sorts of other gloomy topics, but we better get on to the topic in hand. I'll introduce you to them. I've spoken to both of them before on ThinkSpot. Janice Fiamengo is a former professor of English who now spends her time speaking out against feminism and the unfair treatment of men. Many of you will know her YouTube channel, The Fiamengo Files, but she also appears on many other forums. And Diana Davidson's YouTube channel presents videos about wrongly accused and wrongly convicted men. She works with the Lighthouse Project, a non-profit organization helping falsely accused men. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us, Bettina.
Excellent to talk with you again. And
Yeah,
having Janice here this time. It's perfect.
Yeah. We might have a real problem because how do we all shut up and not talk at the same time? Anyway, obviously you should both feel free to interrupt and we'll just see how we go. It's trying to have a very fluid conversation. Today we're talking about something that we've all been watching for quite a while now, which is the issue of Woody Allen. Woody Allen's innocence and how mud sticks to falsely accused men. We've all of us, I think, been intrigued by the long saga that unfolded following accusations from Mia Farrow back in 1992 that their adopted daughter Dylan had been sexually abused by Woody Allen. But I think what really brought it all to the fore for us was an extraordinary blog written by their adopted son, Moses Farrow, that was in August 2018, which had these amazing revelations about what went on in that household and painted this very damaging picture of Mia while supporting Woody's version of events. Now, perhaps you both like to just make a comment about that and how that blog in particular impacted on you. Janice?
Oh, yeah, it's so interesting to me that it makes a very powerful case for the possibility that the kind of abuse that was going on in that household was actually emotional and psychological abuse by Mia. And that perhaps the entirety of Ronan's participation in the Me Too movement, I mean, he's one of the major architects of the Me Too attack on powerful men, has to do really much more with the psychological dynamic related to his abuse in that household, his sense that his father preferred a girl, his sense that his father was doing terrible things to members of his family, and his need to be a champion for women. Perhaps Me Too has his involvement in Me Too has much more to do with that than to do with any actual, groundswell of outrage against actual abuse.
You've got a lovely pussycat in the background.
Yeah, that's Nandor.
Very good. Well, look, some people may not know all the players and all of this, so I'll go on to Diana. And Diana's been following this most closely. I think perhaps we better go back, Diana, to the original accusations, the allegations that Mia made about Woody.
Right. Well, this goes back like about 28 years. And primarily at the very beginning, back in 1992, the big scandal was that Woody Allen was dating an adopted daughter of Mia Farrow. And, on the surface, anyone who hears that, he was dating Mia, and then all of a sudden he's having sex with her daughter. It sounds very incestuous, like literally incestuous. But you have to understand that Mia Farrow, this is a bizarre sort of setup for a family. She had 7 adopted children when she met Woody Allen. So she's kind of child obsessed, and everybody kind of knew Mia Farrow to be a bit of a weirdo herself, right? But the relationship between Woody Allen and her previous children was very distant. So that did change. Ronan Farrow was actually the only child that Mia and Woody had together. And then around that time, he had wanted to adopt her 2 other youngest kids at the time. So that ended up being Dylan and Moses. And so
there were kids spread of all, the age range was huge, wasn't it? I mean, from
it is
kids in their 20s through to newborns,
Yeah,
really.
but like think about that. She had 7 already, and now she's got like these exes 3, and then there's more that followed that, right? Like this is somebody who's, it's not like a small nuclear family. And in fact, he didn't actually speak with Sun Yi, which is the woman he's now married to. He didn't speak to her until she was really like 20 years old. And Mia said, "Hey, why don't you take Sun Yi with you, out to the basketball games I think they were going to." And then very quickly this evolved into a romance. But this is one of her adopted children that he'd never had much contact with. That being said, I think he needed to acknowledge that there was, a bit more unusual stuff going on, because there was like a 30-year age difference, and whether or not he was related to her still. I don't know. Some people believe there's only one person for you in the world that you can fall in love with. I don't believe that. And it was like, really, seriously, couldn't you have just waited for somebody else to come along? But so that was the scandal. And
that was a scandal. Yeah.
The reason that's important, though,
but they also weren't ever married. These Mia and Woody, they never lived together. There are lots of aspects of it. He wasn't her father or stepfather. Clearly it was a very confronting thing to do, to get involved with someone who's the sibling of your own children. That's the essence of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't smart. And I think that he probably at the time should have admitted that it was unusual and it wasn't really the best scenario to have been playing out. But he was just like, there's nothing wrong with it. So he was really being condemned for that. But that's important, because when these allegations then followed with Dylan Farrow, who's his adopted daughter, he had already been outed as having a relationship with Mia Farrow's other adopted daughter, Sun Yi. So he was in the doghouse. And when he went, the day of the allegation, when he went to that house, he was being watched by all the kids. Mia had gone out shopping with a friend, but Moses Farrow in his blog says, "I was supposed to watch everything he did, and I had to, because I knew when she got home, I had to report back on what was going on." And he was never alone with Dylan Farrow the entire time. And so Mia had taken her into a pediatrician at a point where she decided that this allegation was going to go forward. And so she said, "Yeah, he touched me inappropriately," or whatever, like in a child's words. And then she was asked where, and she says, "On my shoulder." So Mia takes her away from the pediatrician's office, has ice cream with her, and goes back the next day, at which point Dylan is now saying that she's been touched on her genital area.
Yeah.
And the actual full story of the allegation wasn't actually published. Dylan wrote a blog in 2018 in response to, I believe, I'm not sure exactly which came first, but I'm pretty sure Moses published his version of what was going on, and then Dylan published her detailed version. And it only came up again in 2016 because Ronan Farrow was deeply involved in the Me Too movement. There was actually a fight over who was the first to report on Harvey Weinstein, because Ronan was supposed to do it first, and then his publisher backed out. So he had to go to the New Yorker, and somebody else managed to publish before he did. And he made it very clear with the media that he was actually the first one with the story. Yeah. And then now he's published a book about it and everything. And interestingly, some people I did read about this, and it triggered me to think more about it, that Ronan had a particular animosity towards Harvey Weinstein because Woody Allen, having been shunned before for his relationship with Sun Yi, had been given another chance to start making movies by Harvey Weinstein. And then it sort of helped him get back into mainstream again. It's just an interesting connection.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, nobody took the Dylan Farrow allegations seriously over that whole 20-year period, because it was clear to them, as it would be normally in a sane culture, that where you've got animosity between people in a custody battle, these kind of allegations should not be #believed. And so they didn't at the time.
And there were two investigations, official investigations, one by the police, one by sort of social services, which determined there was nothing in it, that the allegations didn't stack up. And that got very little coverage, the fact that these had been investigated and found not to be substantiated. Janice, do you remember that period? What was going on?
Well, like Diana, I remember mainly the outrage over Woody Allen's affair with Sun Yi Previn. And I don't really actually remember that much about Mia Farrow's allegation about child sexual abuse of Dylan. I actually went back then and looked at the kind of coverage that existed in 1992 when the allegation first came out. And there was some pretty condemnatory stuff. There was a journalist who wrote for Vanity Fair who has remained involved with the story. And her name is Maureen Ort, I think it is. Wait a minute, let me just check. No, sorry, Orth, O-R-T-H. Maureen Orth. She wrote a huge article in Vanity Fair in 1992 called Mia's Story, where she was very sympathetic to Mia, extremely condemnatory of Woody Allen, and really dwelled on the sex abuse allegation. Then later in that year, or in 1993, when Woody Allen sued Mia Farrow for child custody, to get custody over Dylan, over Moses, and over Ronan, who was then named Satchel. Because as a result of her allegation, he said this was an extremely unstable and dangerous woman. And so he sued for sole custody, and he lost. And the judge in that case, whose name was Judge Elliot Wilk, he wrote a very long and scathing account of what he saw as Allen's failures as a father. And although he did admit that, in terms of the criminal allegation, that there had not been enough evidence to charge and ultimately, of course, convict Allen, but he said that he was not at all convinced that he was innocent of the charges. And he obviously took Mia's allegations at face value. He referred to the fact that even before the allegation went public, that Woody had been in counseling supposedly for an inappropriate relationship with his little daughter, Dylan, adopted daughter, Dylan. And that was Mia's word. Allen has denied this. Allen's sister has denied it. His psychotherapist wrote that there was nothing in his character that indicated he was a child sexual abuser, but still the judge, harshly condemned and said that, that his relationship was monstrously inappropriate, and accepted Mia's version. So there was quite a bit of negative press, and this person, Maureen Orth, she continued to publish. She did an interview with Dylan Farrow in 2013. In 2014, she published another article, again reiterating all of the allegations against Woody Allen. And so she tried to keep the story alive during that intervening period when it had largely died out.
Yeah. But then came the Moses blog. Diana, do you want to go through some of the key elements of that?
Well, Moses had made a brief comment before saying that he felt that that Dylan had been coerced by Mia, and that was basically just ignored. And I think Ronan Farrow actually played a part in just saying, the family is very disappointed in the things that he's said. So by 2018, clearly he's like getting fed up with the misinformation and the continuous attacks that started, because from 2016 on, it was all about Dylan Farrow's accusations. And so his blog was kind of like the modern version of Mummy Dearest. Like he laid out. And the reason why I think this is so important is that we're talking about, as I said, a woman who's adopted like 10 plus children. There's a lot of children who went through her household. And he goes back to saying, this has been a toxic environment before Woody even met her. Yeah. And he lays out detailed allegations of being slapped in the face and humiliated on a regular basis over simple things like, one of the detailed allegations in there is there's a tape measure that she couldn't find. And then she ends up, it's on his bed for some reason. And she says, did you take this? And he goes, no, maybe the workers left it in here or something. She's like, that wasn't the right answer. So she starts slapping him in the face, according to him. And he alleges, and this is, an interesting part too, in terms of how she influences her children, got him to act out like we're going to replay and you're going to act this out until you get it right.
Yeah.
And he was made to do this over a dozen times. So, you know, in terms of, if anybody is, Mommy Dearest is kind of an old film about Joan Crawford and one of her adopted kids, but, you know, that wasn't the only story. He cut belt loops off of his pants and she made him strip naked and humiliated him in front of his siblings and made him stand there naked in front of them. This is serious psychological abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And he says Sun Yi was also being subject to that. He says a porcelain, you know, jar was thrown at her head and luckily missed when she was quite young. And so the concern is that when you're talking about somebody, let's take Woody Allen out of it, right? How can the media have paid no attention to, you know, this child abuse that's being alleged against somebody? If Woody Allen hadn't been involved at all, this would have been a massive scandal, and she should have been actually investigated for child abuse.
Yep.
Kids have died.
Yeah. What also intrigued me was the details of Mia's own background, that
Mm-hmm.
she apparently was abused when she was in her family relationship. There was abuse in the family. Her brother's been imprisoned for sexual abuse. But her own history, she was 21 when she married Frank Sinatra. When that relationship broke up, she moved in with her, I'll turn that off. She moved in with my phone, moved in with my friend, her friend Dory Previn, and ends up pregnant to her husband, Andre Previn. I mean, how is that not mentioned? We're in the context of who's a good guy here, you know? I mean, this woman behaved appallingly. And yeah.
The comparison to the issue with Sun Yi, Mia was 30 years younger than Andre Previn. She moved in and she cheated on, you know, he cheated on his spouse with her. And apparently Andre Previn's former wife ended up institutionalized because of all of this going down. So not to say that that would justify Woody Allen, but, you know, this is something Sun Yi saw happen, right?
Yeah.
So,
but you would have thought if the
she's
media
going with somebody 30 years older.
If the media had any responsibility whatsoever, whenever they talk about Sun Yi, they should mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Surely.
Yeah.
And how is that possible that you only present the negative side of, you know, one person's participation in this sort of activity and not the other?
Mm-hmm.
Janice, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly that. You know, it's the complete double standards. The articles by Maureen Orth that clearly take Mia's side of things portray her as at once sympathetically frail and fragile, a woman who supposedly was so afraid of Woody Allen that, you know, everything that she did or didn't do in relation to her children and his behavior is excused. But at the same time, you know, she's this valiant mother figure concerned above all to protect her children. She's heroic, you know, she's wonderful. She offered so much love and stability to all of these damaged children and cared about them above all. The picture just doesn't add up. I mean, one of the things that comes out in a number of the condemnations of Woody Allen was that supposedly Mia claimed that from the time Dylan was 2 years old, she was already concerned about Allen's behavior. She testified at the custody trial that Allen lost, you know, that from the time Dylan was 2, Woody Allen was looking at her in a sexual way, that he behaved inappropriately with her. You know, he would get into bed with her when he was, you know, only in his underwear. He fondled her in inappropriate ways, you know, all this sort of thing. Well, that doesn't make sense. Like, if that were true and she was really worried about Dylan from the age of 2, why didn't she do anything about it? You know, why did she allow Woody Allen to continue to have close contact with this little girl year after year after year until, you know, 5 years later, then supposedly this allegation comes out? So none of it really makes any sense, and it hasn't been properly investigated at all. It's, you know, it's a completely double standard. standard that's been used. And one other thing I want to mention, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but I thought it was really interesting in Moses's blog that he mentions that he now works with children, and especially adopted children, and the problems that they often have as a result of their being adopted. I think he specializes in cross-racial adoption, and he mentions that people who are child sexual abusers, it's quite unusual that those persons offend only once. And it's quite unusual that in a long career where they had access to many children, that there wouldn't be other allegations. Mm-hmm. And that is a really interesting thing that's never mentioned in relation to Woody Allen's case. That, you know, why isn't that there haven't been other allegations? I mean, I suppose one should be careful saying that, because maybe somebody will now come forward in this era of making accusations. But, you know, in decades and decades of working with all sorts of young women and children on and off film sets, and being indeed a very powerful person in the culture whom lots of people wanted to be around, there have never been any other allegations of that sort.
And you would have thought now, I mean, given that they're actively seeking for ammunition to use against Woody, if there had been such sort of history, that it would have emerged, wouldn't it? I think that's right.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about just young actresses. I mean, we're talking about actual children, because she's alleging from the time Dylan was 2. I just, like, in comment there, I hadn't heard that about getting in bed in the underwear, but I know that Alan has made very clear that he's never spent a single night over there. I don't actually believe that she did that. To me, it smacks of all of these family court hearings where every time they go in, at the beginning, they're in front of a new judge every time, and they just repeat allegations that are completely unfounded. Where, like, how can that have happened when we had a 14-month investigation? 14-month investigation. And that, the psychologists involved and stuff have said absolutely nothing happened. So this just sounds to me like just mud that she was throwing around in family court. And this particular judge that they got, which bizarrely, she was so pleased and thrilled with this judge that she named one of her next adopted children, gave him the middle name of Wilk, because she was so happy with this judge. That's bizarre too. You name your child after the judge who helped you in your custody dispute? This is not a person who's okay in the head.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that came out in the Moses blog, which I really advise people to read it. It's the most extraordinary document, but it also talks about the fact that some of Mia's older children have died through suicide. I think 2 suicides, another one suffered drug addiction and ultimately died of AIDS. I mean, this was not a happy family for all the efforts of the media to present it as such. And not only has Moses revealed these things about what was going on, but there's been various other people, nannies and so on, and who've backed up his story. I mean, it's not just him saying these things.
Well, the most important thing from the blog actually is his description of why the allegations are impossible. So Dylan Farrow alleged in detail that she was taken from the living room by Woody Allen, led to an attic that had a train set in it, when then she was told to lie down on her. She was lying on her stomach. She's watching the trains go by, and then he molested her while she was watching this train. And this stood out in her mind, and to this day, she still can't stand trains, right? They're toy trains. And Moses made it clear. One, I know which attic she's talking about. It was not a finished attic. You couldn't walk into it. And there was certainly no train set in that attic, right? So not only was the space, you couldn't spend time in it, no child would go there. He also, Moses was monitoring everybody, and Dylan never left the room with Woody Allen. But there was no train set. So her allegation is literally impossible.
Mm-hmm. And there's apparently Mia loved doing photos of everything that ever happened in that family. And there was no recording of this attic area being used as a play area, no photos of the train set. I mean, there are lots of things that don't add up, and yet have been absolutely glossed over by the media. But then, of course, what happens is, some of this dies down, but Woody is still very much seen as an abuser in the eyes of, many in the media particularly. And then along came Me Too. And maybe Diana, you can take up the story then.
Well, so it gets raised, while we're in the midst of all these Me Too allegations, let's not forget, and it was, of course, this is being raised by Ronan Farrow, let's not forget the allegations against Woody Allen. Like, so when I say it's being raised by Ronan Farrow, he was such an instigator, and he became the golden boy of the media. Mm-hmm. So, he's so influential that when Woody Allen just finished writing a book, he managed to start a protest against it and get that book canceled. So he had to go at the last minute to a new publisher. Like, this is a very powerful person. And we have to be very concerned now with these allegations that that the media is not just parroting the popular point of view from the people who are movers and influencers and who can cancel them if they don't agree with them. Like, if you don't have a free press to honestly investigate and report on things, and the media is going to put unfair attention on something because of a powerful person within their circles, then we're not living in a free society.
Yep.
This is as serious as it gets when people have their lives destroyed because of who knows who, and who the media decides is important to report on, and who they believe. And I don't think any of them, and this is the problem, I don't think any of the media reporting negatively about Woody Allen actually believe the allegations are true.
Really?
I don't know. It's hard to work that out. But what you've also got is the sort of posturing by people who see this as a useful means of proving their PC credentials. So what came in once Rowan started speaking out about this, and once Me Too really started getting a grip in I suppose it was 2017, 18, wasn't it?
Yeah, fall. It was really the fall of 2017. I think it was
October 2016, actually.
Oh, was it
October 2016? Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking it was 2017.
4 years now.
Yeah, I mean, it took a grip very quickly. And then as soon as, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that Dylan Farrow wrote an article, an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times called, something like, why has the Me Too revolution spared Woody Allen, to raise the whole thing again. And she was supported by her brother Ronan. And right after that, I think that was in either December of 2017 or January of 2018. And then in 2018, all these figures came forward to say that, they regretted having worked with Allen, various theater companies that were going to stage, versions of, what was it now, Bombs Over Manhattan or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, with Drew, and, various actors ranging from Colin Firth to Natalie Portman and all sorts of other lesser figures said that they regretted working with him. And I mean, it's just amazing. Like, I mean, I can't believe people would come forward and say they regretted working with him. He's one of the most significant filmmakers of the second half of the 20th century. And to say on the basis of allegations alone that one can't possibly know to be true, and that in fact were investigated and found not to have substance, that therefore you wished you had not worked with the man. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And all sorts of people, of course, piously saying that they would take the proceeds from the film that they had worked in and donate them to, what was it called? The Time's Up organization that had been formed in order to prevent future such, sexual abuse and sexual harassment and all this. Yeah, the virtue signaling is completely off the charts, utterly predictable, of course. I mean, at least there were a few actors who also came forward and said, no, I'm not certain. And in fact, I'm really glad I worked with Allen, and he's wonderful. And I believe he's innocent. But the mad rush to condemn him is, of course, now a very familiar sight, but shocking and disgusting nonetheless.
And after 28 years, I mean, it's not like they didn't know the allegations. It's not like it just happened in
Yeah.
2016, you know,
Yeah.
and they, you know, clearly everybody knew about it. And so when they did work with him, they already, you know, had made a decision. He's probably not guilty. Now, all they're doing is saying, oh yeah, I'm being told that I'll be publicly shamed if I don't say I hashtag believe.
And so cynical. I mean, there's a lovely story apparently in Woody Allen's new book, which talks about a guy who, the star of his latest movie, Rainy Day, Timothy, I think it's Chalamet, and he told Woody's sister that he was up for an Oscar for a previous movie, and he and his agent thought he had a better chance of getting it if he denounced Woody, and that's why he did it. I mean, it is just really makes you despair, doesn't it?
Yeah, the total lack of integrity and sincerity of so many public figures who can't even go so far as to say simply, I don't know. Yeah, it occurred a long time ago. As far as I know, you know, my dealings with Woody Allen have always been positive, and let's just leave it at that. The rush to ridiculous, you know, self-exculpation through this virtue signaling is unbelievable, but all too familiar.
Well, and as a reminder, he's been married successfully to Soon-Yi Previn now for 23 years, like,
yeah,
or over 20 years anyways. It's like,
yeah.
Not only is the allegation old, but like when they said they were actually in love with each other, they meant it. Like,
yeah.
They're still together.
Yeah, and that too, I mean, the really the defamatory comments about that relationship. If you look back to the 1992 articles that came out, this all sorts of people quoted by this Maureen Orth saying that Soon-Yi was actually had a lower than average IQ, that she was severely sort of not mentally disabled exactly, but that she was learning impaired. You know, all suggesting, like it went on and on about how it took her, you know, 3 hours to do a bit of homework that somebody else would have whipped off in 15 minutes, and all sorts of things to suggest that she really did not have the capacity to consent, either the emotional or intellectual capacity to have an adult relationship. And, you know, yeah, like what happened to all of that, that's turned out to be, you know, just completely baseless, horrible slander of this woman who made this decision and has been in a marriage that seems to have worked, as far as we can discern, for many decades.
I remember that from her interview, a really great interview for Vulture magazine. I was just checking which magazine it was. Vulture magazine in September 2018, so around Moses' blog, the same time frame. I remember her saying something like, "I'm not some retarded child that got taken advantage of." It's like, it was something really strongly worded that stood out, and I was like, oh my God. But yeah, there's just like, again, like that's the way her own family decided to paint her in retaliation for, you know, this is what they're presenting as a strong, good quality, good moral family, and the way they treat each other.
Yeah, and here is this very stable marriage, which is, they've raised 2 more children in that marriage. I think they adopted. And that gets no play at all. And in the meantime, Mia's totally dysfunctional history gets, you know, is never properly discussed. And what's also appalling is the willingness of the institutions to hop on board. I think it was Amazon cancelled a 4-movie deal with Woody, which was supposed to have earned him whatever, 68 million. But he sued. I'm pleased to notice that he sued them over the broken deal, and they received he got a settlement. And of course, he's now back making movies again. But also then more recently, Diana, you mentioned the publisher of his recent memoir was called Apropos of Nothing, which was supposed to be coming out in April 2020, and I think it was delayed because I mean, this is just classic, that the employees in that organization went on strike to force the decision to cancel the publication of this memoir. And of course, Rowan was right in there agitating that this should happen. And Hachette, the publisher, dropped the book. I mean, the spinelessness of these organizations that cave into that sort of pressure.
Yeah.
There was a lot of criticism on Ronan Farrow because he's a journalist, so he
Yeah.
by default should support freedom of speech. And
Yeah.
so he was actually criticized for championing the canceling of the book.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it was the same sort of root publisher that just published his book. So it was it was a little bit sloppy on the part of the publisher, but it was like an imprint of the same, people that did his. It's just that and I think that's true. I mean, nobody believes in freedom of speech until they support the speech of people that they hate.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about the new book is, of course, it brought out all the virtue signaling, where reviewers who reviewed that book did so absolutely sneering at it. And the classic was a New York Times critic who said that volunteering to review this book in our moral climate is akin to volunteering for the 2021 Olympic javelin catching team. There were all these smart ass comments about how brave I am to even review this book.
Exactly.
And Janice, you commented on this particularly ghastly article in the New York Times. And tell me about that. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy.
Yeah, his name is A.O. Scott. Yeah, and I don't know anything about him. He's a film critic, I guess, but I don't read the New York Times. But yeah, he wrote this article called, I think it was called My Woody Allen Problem. And it's just, it's a piece of drivel where he talks about everything in Woody Allen's entire body of work now must be revisited in light of the supposed, Me Too revelations or the renewed interest as a result of Me Too. And so, he reads everything in Woody Allen's corpus of films as some kind of weird evidence that the allegations against him are true. And he even makes the claim that Woody Allen presents himself in his films as this sort of, bumbling, neurotic, narcissistic, nerdy intellectual, but that itself is a form of entitlement, that's how he created his masculine mystique. And that in itself, because many of us find it attractive. I mean, I always found it attractive in an affectionate sort of way. I do not think he's presenting himself as any kind of figure of sexual.
Woody Allen as an alpha male? Is that what they're actually saying?
That's what he's essentially saying. Yeah, that this was a figure. That this was the way he purveyed his power, his masculine power through film, and that the fact that that most of Allen's films are about the waywardness of the heart and show, some older men being attracted to younger women, that this tells us something, really shocking about the truth of Farrow's claims against Allen. Hey, look, he depicts older men being attracted to younger women. Therefore, anybody who ever liked any of his films or ever said anything good about his films is somehow participating in the sexual abuse, or at least the romanticizing of the sexual abuse of children or young women.
Right.
I mean,
there's no difference between a 2 or 7-year-old and a 20-year-old.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the really bizarre thing throughout this whole thing. It's as if, and I'm not an expert in this area, but as far as I know, child sexual abusers are not also interested in women in their 20s. Like, you're either one or the other. But it's a
paraphilia.
Mm-hmm. But the idea here is that we simply read everything in Allen's oeuvre, to use that word, as as some sort of horrible evidence for the way in which our culture has accepted and promoted male entitlement and the sexual abuse of a whole range of people, ranging from 2-year-old girls to 30-year-old women.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what he's talking about really, because the two movies of Alan's that I know best, one is Diane Keaton, Annie Hall with Diane Keaton, and the other, of course, is Hannah and Her Sisters, in which Mia Farrow stars. Neither of those movies, well, certainly neither of them presents Alan as any kind of, entitled figure of sexual allure. Quite the opposite.
He's self-effacing.
He's self-effacing. He's mocking himself.
But the point he's making is that he still gets the girls. That he gets. And what I find really offensive about that Scott article is it's the Puritanism, the anti-sex attitude.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Here's a man who finds it really offensive that Woody is preoccupied with sex.
Yeah.
And that's one of his major, the persona that often emerges in his early movies, particularly. He's obsessed by sex. He makes jokes about sex. He's interested in getting go to bed with women. And his nerdy, the sort of intellectual type he presents himself to be, often does attract a certain sort of woman. So he wins. He actually gets the girls.
Yeah, how dare he?
Yeah, that's right.
He's giving hope.
That is part of me too. This seeing adult, particularly lusty male sexuality as something offensive and dangerous.
Absolutely.
And that was a major theme in that review, and it's a theme in a lot of the critique of Woody Allen's early work, particularly.
Yeah.
This idea that, being a successful bloke getting women into bed is something really offensive. And it just drives me crazy that is taking over as a narrative in our culture.
Yeah, he goes on and on about how anybody who even enjoys the movies is somehow participating in this guilty thing. I mean, it's just, it's utterly ridiculous. And again, I don't even think it's even true. I mean, in Annie Hall, that's about a failed relationship. The Alan character is really not successful at all. He ends up alone and pining for Annie at the end of the story. The whole story is about the failure of the relationship. And, many of the other movies are far more complex than this guy gives him credit for. But the smug self-righteousness and the censoriousness about male sexual desire. Oh, wow. Older men being attracted to younger women. I mean, Hannah and Her Sisters, I think they're all in their early 30s. So I hardly see what the problem is, but the men are older than the women. Let's reorganize all of the, the whole libido of the male because we say that it's bad. It's just so, it's just completely crazy. But that's the thing that you do if you're a film critic in order to advertise that you're on the right side of history.
Particularly if you're a New York Times film critic.
Exactly.
But no one challenges this stuff. No one
Well, talk about smug too. There was another article called, I read Woody Allen's books so you don't have to. Like, who are you that I'm going to trust you to tell me what books are good?
Yeah.
There's so much smugness just in the title itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like he suffered. Yeah.
And all these men posturing, I mean, which is all, I think there's no question that some of that is about trying to avoid the possibility that they will be accused.
Yes.
And we've seen a hell of a lot of that in recent years where men
it doesn't save them though. It's like, this is one of the things that social justice warriors eat their own. It is like, you are not protected just by virtue signaling on a prior case.
You can denounce other men with absolute vigor and righteousness. It doesn't make any difference. If anything, maybe it opens you up to accusations yourself. It's ridiculous.
Well, let's talk about the other men. I mean, all of us have had experience helping men who've been falsely accused. And we know that even if they're exonerated, even if the accusations are absolutely disproved, mud sticks, that they never recover the damage to their reputations. Why don't you both talk a little bit about that? Janice, you want to start?
Oh, well, this is really Diana's area, so I don't want to take time away from her. But yeah, I mean, it's just so true. I've been in correspondence with men who were victimized by completely baseless. In one case, I'm thinking of my good friend Joe. Two women wrote an anonymous letter to his employer saying that he had committed some vague, sexual harassment against them. He lost his job. He lost all sorts of, he's a poet, he lost gigs. His name was besmirched. There was no evidence whatsoever. There had never been a conviction. There had never even been a charge. It was just the allegation, the willingness of people in our culture to err on the side of safety, what they see as safety, and to fire a man or to watch as his reputation is destroyed and not lift a finger to defend him. The willingness of many men as well as women in our culture to do that is just astounding, and it seems that it's unbudgeable.
Unbudgeable. Diana, this is your life.
I mean, the stories I could tell you are endless. And I mean, one of the things to say off the top is that there is no way this thing happens to you. It's like every case is so unique. What the motive of the person who's making the false accusation, how it plays out, whether or not they go to the police. I'll start with the most horrendous thing. When the Me Too movement first started, they were doing all these shit lists online. So people were doing these anonymous accusations, protecting other people who may or may not exist. And in Vancouver, where I lived at the time, there was a shit list of people in the music industry, the DJs. And one of the kids committed suicide. He was actually given a heads up to what was about to happen. And he was actually, my inside information, which nobody has been told, and but I've seen the evidence of it. He was actually being pursued by his accuser, and she was trying to break up his relationship. He'd cheated on his girlfriend, and that's why he felt so bad. So when he found out all this was going to happen, his girlfriend was going to find out he cheated on her, he just jumped off a bridge and killed himself. And when they found out that this kid had committed suicide, they celebrated. This is who we're talking about. These people that you want to placate, these people that everybody is out there virtue signaling for, these are murderous people who don't care when people die. There was a second guy on the list who disappeared. They actually said, I hope he killed himself too. Okay, so that's who we're talking about. Now, when we go into whether or not you can recover, like first thing is don't kill yourself. I usually tell people to go look up John Ronson's So You've Been Publicly Shamed, because it actually talks about.
Say that again, Diana. What is it?
John Ronson, a British writer who's quite comedic, but he wrote a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed.
Okay.
And he goes through, especially because of the internet now and how easy that is to have that happen to you. He gives examples of people who've been publicly shamed who didn't survive it. Like, I don't think he has suicide stories, but people who just never recovered. And then a couple of people who actually managed to get through it. And he also looks into reputation recovery and stuff. And he's given an auction. You can pick one of the people he knows about to try and help with reputation management to get them cleared from the internet. So these aren't just sexual allegations. Some of them are just public shaming over having tweeted something inappropriate, thinking it was funny at the time, and then, getting on an airplane and finding out 12 hours later that they were the biggest villain in the world, right?
Right.
So, so that is really good because it helps you to understand you're not the only one who's experiencing this.
Yeah.
When you get accused, whether it's just on social media or you find out you're being charged, the panic attacks, the anxiety. For falsely accused people, obviously it's really intense. For people who've done it, they're just like, damn, how do I avoid getting caught, right? But there are a lot of falsely accused people. And one of the most annoying things for me is when people start talking about percentages, because you need to understand, to get charged, they don't need, the only evidence that's needed is testimony. So, and this is important for people to understand, when you give testimony, you're giving evidence under oath. So that is evidence, and that's all they need, no corroboration, right? To get something marked as a false accusation, you need the complainant to confess that she lied, and you also need corroboration to her confession that she lied, right? So you can get convicted with no corroboration, and obviously without the guy confessing to it, but in order to get it to count as a false accusation, you have to have not just that confession, but corroboration. So now when you think about that, whether it's 5 or 8%, because they're now agreeing that it's actually more like 8%, because the FBI said so, that's not the case. That's 8% of cases where the person confessed and there was evidence that they lied.
Mhm.
The actual false accusations are so much bigger. And to talk about percentages encourages the idea that we could convict somebody because so many rapists get away. It's never, you should never talk about numbers in a criminal trial or in an accusation. You have to talk about the people, right? You have to understand the people involved. You have to understand the accusation. And most of these guys being accused on social media, you know, they don't even, you know, often know who their accuser is, so they can't answer to it. And even if they know who it is, they're never told what the person actually said about them. Even in university investigations, a lot of universities won't even tell you what you're accused of.
Yeah. Of course, I wanted to come in here and talk about my university experiences, which is pretty much my main cause, if you like, at the moment, working with young men who are being falsely accused on Australian university campuses and dealt with by these ad hoc committees which have no oversight, who are making decisions about these young guys' lives, no proper evidence, no legal protection, no due process rights, nothing. And I've talked to these young men, exactly the sort of thing, Diana, you're talking about, that they're so ashamed of the accusation. I mean, one young man who just went, he wouldn't even go home. He didn't tell his parents. He went and hid out in some, you know, friend's place and just caved in under the covers in his bed and didn't emerge for days. People, it's no wonder these young men commit suicide because they just don't know how to begin to deal with these accusations. And they're facing such an unjust system, and they know it. They immediately get turfed out of their college. They're told they're not allowed to come back to university. And this is, I hope I'm going to have some breakthroughs in Australia exposing what's going on here. But I mean, this is at the heart of that area, as well as, you know, men being falsely accused across the country. And I often hear from, for instance, the mothers of males who've been accused, who say that they were told by the police that they will not take any action against the accuser, even though it's been shown that there was a false, because it might discourage other victims coming forward.
Right.
They will not take action against a false someone who's been shown to be a false.
And
what do you do with a legal system like that?
Yeah, well, and the important thing to understand is that the police in these cases, they have no charging discretion. So as soon as somebody alleges domestic violence or a sexual allegation of some sort, be it sexual interference with a child or sexual assault with an adult, they have to lay a charge. If they don't, their supervisor will send the case back to them and tell them to lay a charge. So they don't even, and they're also being told, don't even ask too many questions, because the more they talk, then the harder it gets for them to, you know, they'll be challenged with more stuff in court. So, so the charging policy is automatic.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. My husband is calling me. I have to go. We actually have to take my mother out to dinner tonight. So I'm gonna skip off. But
all right, Janice.
Thank you so much. It's been
lovely to talk to you.
It's been
lovely
nice to speak to you. Yeah, wonderful to see you both.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. Well, maybe we'll stop. And I'm sure people have had a good dose of this discussion. And maybe I think we'll obviously have to have discussions again with the three of us. We have such a lot of common knowledge and experience in some of these areas, so and it's very useful. I hope it's useful to people for us to share that.
Yeah, well, real experience of all of us being contacted by so many people and advocating for them, and you know, so not just, you know, we're not just book read, we're actually life experienced on a lot of this stuff.
All right, Diana, lovely to talk to you, and we'll do it again one day.
Definitely. All right, thanks so much.
Okay, bye everybody.